There's definitely no one route or one answer. So that's the good news. The bad news is you're probably going to have to piecemeal together a weird Frankenstein-esque structure via which to weather many unexpected storms. When you're programming at the local level, and especially when you're starting out, you can't necessarily depend on ticket sales to make your ends meet. A lot of the DIY scene is driven by promoters who are able or willing to take the risk of putting their own capital on the line to support shows that don't break even. And so you have to have the runway to be able to do that at first, or you have to be able to find the runway to be able to do that, because the last person, the last entity who gets paid out is the promoter. The artists get paid out first. You have to pay out all the nice people who helped you make it happen. You have to pay out the venue. If you're not making any sort of guaranteed bar rev or similar for them, security, insurance, anything else, fences, porta potties, anything else you might need to make it happen, those are all non-negotiable costs. The whole scene is really driven by people who are willing to just put in a lot of labor for free and sometimes shell out themselves to pay the folks who made the event happen.
People ask me, especially new and emerging artists, how do I get gigs? How do I get my band booked at venues? And I often encourage people to try and book their own shows. There's nothing wrong with trying to get booked at existing venues, but it's a bit more fun and rewarding, and in some ways a better way of getting your name out there to try and put on your own shows, to sort of see the void in the marketplace. And DIY business model is really about putting on concerts as an entrepreneurial way of getting your name out there as an artist or as an event organizer. Now, when it comes to DIY events, it's often about using DIY venues, and it's not totally clear exactly what the definition of a DIY venue is, but really it sort of like stands in contrast to traditional venues, and traditional venues being usually licensed bars or established concert halls. DIY spaces are sort of more non-traditional music spaces. It could be a laundromat, it could be a library, it could be a clothing boutique, it could be a furniture warehouse, it could be any sort of space, public space that's not intended for live music performance, but that you as an organizer are repurposing to create events, to showcase live music, and hopefully to bring together communities that maybe aren't heard in traditional venues. Like, what's fun about doing DIY spaces is getting to break new ground, getting to break in new spaces that haven't yet been used for shows or events, and using your imagination and exploring the city, pounding the pavement, exploring your neighborhood on foot or on bike, and imagining what can happen. Like, maybe there's a struggling bar down the street or an empty art gallery that's looking for things to happen. And sometimes it just involves walking in and asking the owner, hey, I'm in a band, can we play here? Or I have an idea for an event. I want to bring together some DJs and have a party and use your space. Business owners are looking for ways to generate business, generate revenue, generate more attention for their space. It could be a partnership. It's really just about having the vision to imagine what's possible, what's not happening in your neighborhood, and imagining how live music and how bringing people together can really animate your neighborhood and create that sense of cultural vitality that might be there but maybe is overlooked or needs to be strengthened. There's always more room for more concerts, more parties, more gatherings. And that's really what's exciting about the DIY business model.
I hear from a lot of artists, a lot of emerging artists, and a lot of artists in DIY and underground spaces. I don't bother applying for grants because my genre, my scene, my community I don't see them represented on grant lists, and I feel like there's a bias against what I'm doing or how I'm doing it that doesn't speak to the council, so I'm not even going to try. And that's a completely valid standpoint for sure. At the same time, on the funding side, what I constantly hear, because I'm constantly getting called in to participate in these advocacy sessions, et cetera, is we want to know where our gaps are. We want to know whose needs we're not meeting. The funders are, public funders are mandated to resource underrepresented, high potential art forms. You would be surprised at the awareness that does exist within the funding system about what they're not doing. Putting their money where their mouth is absolutely a slow game and a long game. It can be incredibly frustrating for me to be able to say, oh, you know, even if you don't think you should try to do this, it's worth being a squeaky wheel. Not everyone can afford to be a squeaky wheel. Not everyone can take that risk or wants to take that risk or needs to take that risk. If you are someone from who identifies with a genre or community that is underrepresented in these spaces, and you don't feel like sticking your neck out in those spaces to say that, find an ally who is embedded in those spaces, who can speak for you or in support, because they do exist and they are, you know, willing and ready to be heard, at least sometimes. The reason that we don't see certain specific communities or artists represented on those funding lists is simply because they're not asking. It's a vicious cycle where maybe there is a bias, and that's read and sensed and understood by the community, and so the community gives up and they stop applying, and then that bias deepens. I mean, something that I try to promote as much as possible is actively and vocally shifting those embedded structural barriers. So how do you do that? You speak out in support. If you're not in a comfortable doing it yourself or in a position to do it yourself, tap someone who is already securely embedded and have them do it. Someone who is getting funded or on the jury or being called in to speak to funders. Two DIY groups is better than one, and 8 is better than 2, etc. So if you can find other folks in your space that are united by whatever common denominator, it doesn't have to be genre, it doesn't have to be artist, it might be community, it might be identity, it might just be a shared value system, it might simply be that you're all dedicated to creating community-run local music opportunities. Whatever it is, if you can create that loose platform, even if you're not all going in on every grant, if 3 of you in one season have a few shows you want to produce, and you can go in together to get funding where you're pooling your impact to pitch whatever it is you're pitching, you're going to be in that better of a position to land the funding for yourself and to sustain the models for others. Being able to join forces is huge in securing resources. Doing it together is huge. Don't DIY, DIT. That's, I think, a big one. You also don't have to hire a quote unquote grant writer to explain what you do. It probably is, especially if you are pooling resources, it probably is worth your time to pay someone in a favor or in cash or otherwise to look over your grant, to look over your budget, to give you feedback. Ideally, someone who has served on an Arts Council jury before. There are a lot of people out there who want to give back and who have been in exactly the position that you are in right now if you have not produced a show before, and who are so happy to look at your materials and let you know if there are any red flags there or if there are any opportunities to tweak things. So please do ask, use each other. So public funding, I think, is a huge one, especially in a space that is defined so strongly by its values. That is what public funds are there to support, and there's no reason we shouldn't be asking for them. Private entities, whether they be individuals or corporations, might connect with what you're doing on a whole range of different levels and scales. So it might not be the roster they're attracted to. It might be, you might be making a business case for them. You might be making a neighborhood case for them. You can position your value proposition in lots of different ways depending on who you're speaking to. And that's also something that I think is overlooked a lot. A lot of times I think promoters especially promoters who are starting out and have very specific reasons for why they're doing things. If that scene doesn't resonate with you, then what they're doing doesn't resonate with you. But in fact, what is interesting and exciting about your project to you might not be what's interesting and exciting to someone else who might have resources to support you. So simply going out and making connections and talking to people about the different angles of what you do can open up a whole number of opportunities that you might not have seen before. Not being afraid to explore those different angles is super critical to building a sustainable model or even just getting off the ground. I feel like putting together a funding plan for a project it's absolutely a strategic process, and it's absolutely a creative process. And it's as essential to building a good program as the roster that you pull together and the artists that you book, because a roster is only as good as the resources you have to properly pay the artists you'd like to book. So it's all part of the creative puzzle piecing together that is concert production. I try to embrace it all as an integral part of a single whole. Either get your head around what is enjoyable and exciting and interesting and even motivating about the building the business plan part, the easier and more sustainable things are going to get for you in the long run. Or find a business partner who doesn't like doing that, and you take care of the stuff you like doing.
So the Toronto music scene's business model, or main business model, the last 35 to 40 years has been the door bar split. So if you're an event organizer or a band coming in to put on your own show at, say, the Horseshoe Tavern or the Garrison, you take the door, which means you're taking all the money that people pay at the door from tickets, and the bar takes the bar. They make money off selling drinks. Clean separation. If you're a new event promoter, I'd recommend starting somewhere that does have a liquor license. Maybe it is that struggling bar or Legion Hall down the street. Then you don't really need to worry about the liability and costs of serving drinks. It can be a great way to get experience, to just do it like a bar and just worry about bringing money in from the door. Putting on events gets really, really costly. And if you're getting into full-scale DIY events where you're bringing in PAs and running a bar, the cost can really add up quickly, which is why a lot of people access public funding to offset those expenses. Getting grants isn't easy. It can take a lot of trial and error. You can apply a lot of times and get turned down, and maybe it'll take even a few years. When it comes to grants for most event organizers, I usually recommend starting out with small project grants, either to the Toronto Arts Council or to the Ontario Arts Council. You might start out with just a few $1,000s, but it can help cover the costs of artist fees and PA rentals and maybe some social media ads or some poster printing. All the costs of an event can really add up, and only relying on ticket sales and bar sales sometimes is not always going to cover things. That's why a lot of us go the nonprofit route. So if you've got a series going or a collective running, and it's been going well for a couple of years, and you're trying to think about long-term sustainability and where you want to take it, you might want to consider incorporating as a nonprofit. Wavelength did that after 7 years of running our series. It wasn't an overnight thing for us. What I'd recommend is maybe trying to find a lawyer that would help you with the incorporation that might work pro bono. And then once you're a nonprofit, you can access higher levels of funding. You can also apply for special occasion permits legally and receive them as a nonprofit, and then sell alcohol and get that additional revenue stream, which can really help out. It's not for everyone, but going the nonprofit route is just definitely something that's worth considering.
Being able to boost your stuff on socials helps. Having great artists on your roster obviously goes a long way. Having folks involved who have influencer style capacity on social goes a long way. Having a nice budget for posters, that's all great. Partnering up with a venue that has a regular audience and has good standing and reputation in the community, it all matters. The thing, again, this is gonna be a theme. The thing that matters most is community building. your audience is your community. At the end of the day, the DIY system is a relationship-based economy built on goodwill and solid relationships and solidarity. And when I'm exhausted, and I've been to 4 shows already this week, and I have a huge grant due tomorrow, and 3 artists who are waiting to hear back from me, and team members who need things from me, of course I'm going to prioritize artists that I want to see, but I'm also going to prioritize friends who I want to support and who have given a lot back to me and the scene and other people. And if you're not investing in your community, they're not going to invest in you. And so much of the music scene here and anywhere, but really especially in Toronto, you know, if you're talking hyper local, emerging DIY level, is it's as much about the scene as it is about the music. It's as much as about people supporting each other as it is about the product that's going to be heard on any stage on any night. Investing in building that scene is as important as anything that you will do, if not the most important thing as a promoter. It will determine everything. It will determine how good of a curator you are. It will determine your understanding of the dynamics of the local scene and the fluctuations in the local scene, which is so essential as a programmer. It will keep your audience base strong. It's about word of mouth marketing, and it's about friendship. It sounds cheesy, but it's true. It takes time to develop that trust. Once you have it, you're part of something that will impact you for the rest of your life. You can't put a dollar figure on that. So worth it. That's ROI, that's worth it.
The thing about DIY shows, it's really a form of artistic risk-taking. It's creative risk-taking, but it's also city building. It's bringing the city to life. And it can be scary at first. And some of the most exciting events, you know, happen off the grid and parts of the neighborhood that don't have live music yet. And that's the really exciting thing about it, is bringing art and culture to areas where it's not happening as much as in other areas. And at first it might be scary and it might feel lonely, but it's really worth taking those risks and asking those questions, you know, inviting all your friends, asking that laundromat owner if you can do a show, you know, like feeling silly asking those questions, but just trying, just doing it. That's really what do it yourself is all about. But one thing to remember is you don't have to do everything yourself. Find other people to help you, you know, find like-minded people who want to make amazing things happen in the city. Do it yourself is great, but do it together is way better.
One of the important things that you learn is, if you want to keep doing this sustainably, is when to push and when to hold back. So there might be certain productions via which you want to give everything, for which you might want to shell out many more hours of your volunteer time or ask many more favors than you would for a standard weekly series. Learning how to concentrate strategically your asks of other folks in an economy based on favors and goodwill is pretty key. If you tire your community out early on, then you're not going to have any gas left for later. So just that's something that took me a while to learn. For me, it wasn't so much over asking of others, but rather over asking of myself. So much of the investment in the DIY space is going to be your own time. If you have it, sometimes it's your own money, and if not, that money translates in other ways. Developing a clear system to understand how much input is going to be required for certain methods of output is really important to learn. And pacing is really important, especially if you're producing more than one event a year or producing events regularly. Long Winter's model is interesting because we essentially throw a huge festival once a month. So we're a weird combination of fest and series. We have the pacing of a series with the ambition of a festival. Learning where to focus our investment for optimal return is a constant, it's a constant dynamic negotiation.